What I would say to the South African government is you did a wonderful job getting an up-to-date constitution that puts human rights and individual freedom at the heart of your constitution. It's a world-leading constitution. So why don't you now do the same thing with your drug laws? Why don't you turn your drug laws into rational, evidence-based pieces of legislation that you can lead the world in that as well?
The law against cannabis and the entire war on drugs is based on outdated colonial science and very Eurocentric moral codes. That's no foundation for justice.
The fact is that whenever you have a substantial demand for something, there's going to be a substantial supply. So the notion of relying on punitive prohibitionist laws and police and prisons to try to regulate what's essentially a global commodities market is absurd.
At the moment, the laws are so draconian that they're arresting children over the age of 12. They can actually give children custodial sentences for using drugs. And that's absolutely shocking.
Cannabis is a plant with many names and uses. It's been used by humans for over 7,000 years and is found on every continent where food and medicine can be grown. It is only in the last 100 years that this super plant has been banned and maligned using false science and weak moral reasoning. Now that the world is moving to a more earth-friendly means of production and consumption, cannabis is making a comeback. We will introduce you to a green future that could uplift the rural poor and middle-class South Africans and create a taxable industry that will generate billions of rands. With so much false information about cannabis being spread over the last 70 years, we set out to uncover the basic facts. What is cannabis? Where does it come from? And what can it offer us? Let's ask botanist Greg Nicholson to give us a better understanding of this incredible plant.
Cannabis is an annual plant. It's dioecious, which means the male and the female flowers are generally born on separate plants. It's unclear as to exactly where it originated from, and that's largely because it has been used and spread so far throughout the world. But it's generally believed that cannabis sativa originated in Eastern Asia, cannabis indica in Central Asia, and cannabis ruderalis is from Eastern Europe. But they have been transported and grown all over the world, so it's a little bit unclear as to exactly where they originated from. The prohibition of industrial hemp makes no logical sense because it has no psychoactive properties and can be a potentially extremely useful and productive crop. So it definitely seems like that should be focused on and allowed to grow in South Africa.
To get a breakdown of the history behind the criminalization of cannabis, we spoke to academic and historian Craig Patterson.
Cannabis, I think, is one of those few plants that you can't put in a nutshell. It's so varied. You almost can't pin it down. There's something about it that's got a bit of everything in it. The effect that it's had has been incredibly influential. The functions that it's fulfilled in society as a dietary supplement, as a cereal, an industrial fiber, as a recreational substance. There's no one way of seeing cannabis, and society needs to look at it a bit differently as a result.
Having seen what led to the banning of cannabis in South Africa, we spoke to Ras Gareth Prince to find out where we stand at present.
Where we can get with the times and start earning valuable currency.
Ras Gareth is a Rastafarian lawyer and cannabis activist who's been fighting for the legalization of cannabis since 1994.
It's quite normal for the people of South Africa to accept that after the High Court judgment that citizens could use cannabis, because that's what the High Court judgment declared. It found the laws against the usage of cannabis for private purposes to be unconstitutional. However, the law in our country is such that whenever a law is found to be unconstitutional, that decision must be confirmed by the highest court in our country, which is the Constitutional Court. So in the High Court, we got the victory. We got a unanimous declaration by 3 judges that the laws indeed were unconstitutional and that it had to be changed. That happened on the 31st of March 2017. And the state appealed the finding of the Western Cape High Court. Then, on the 18th of September 2018, the Constitutional Court unanimously confirmed that the cannabis laws are unconstitutional, and they confirmed the High Court's finding that it infringed, amongst others, the right to privacy.
Cannabis and hemp were amongst the world's biggest industries until petrochemicals and modern medicine replaced them. This has changed again radically in the last 10 years, with legalization of medical and recreational cannabis in over 20 states in America, Canada, Uruguay, Colombia, and a growing number of European countries. The recreational and medical markets in the USA alone have a value of $7.7 billion. According to Forbes magazine, this is expected to grow to $31 billion in 2021. South Africa needs to move fast to cash in on the opportunities presented by this new billion-dollar industry. Medical marijuana, as it is known in the US, has grown to 29 states where residents are legally allowed to access the medical benefits of cannabis. Professor of Economics and founder of the Drug Policy Alliance, Ethan Needleman, tells us how and why this happened in the US.
The best way to think about cannabis, and for that matter, the other things like coca or opium, is that they're essentially global commodities, very much like alcohol and tobacco and sugar, coffee and tea. And the fact is that whenever you have a substantial demand for something, there's going to be a substantial supply. So the notion of relying on punitive prohibitionist laws and police and prisons to try to regulate what's essentially a global commodities market is absurd. It's why in the United States, in Canada, in Uruguay, and increasingly in Europe, we see a movement away from prohibition and in the direction of legal regulation and taxation of this commodity. In the United States and many other countries, moving first on the legalization of cannabis for medical purposes was both a good thing in itself and then helped to transform the broader dialogue around cannabis and cannabis policy. But there's other countries, like for example the Netherlands or Uruguay, which never became that engaged in the medical issue and simply moved forward with first the decriminalization and then the legal regulation of cannabis. I'm not sure which is the best approach in South Africa. Seems to me that one should move forward on both legs at the same time, as well as legalizing hemp for industrial purposes. People ask me, how's legalization working in the United States? And the first thing I say is, well, we're now selling marijuana legally in a growing number of states. It's being taxed and regulated, and the sky did not fall. There's no big increase in adolescent marijuana use. There's no big increase in accidents or crime. In fact, sometimes there's a decrease. But the most surprising thing is that the tax revenue is far exceeding everybody's expectations. Already state governments are bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars a year in tax revenue. And in the United States, that tax revenue is specifically dedicated for things like school construction, for policing, for youth programs. So the money's being well spent, instead of spending it on police arresting young people for low-level cannabis offenses and putting them in jail or prison.
A lot of people have a misunderstanding of what hemp actually refers to.
Tony Budden is a globally recognized industrial cannabis expert. We asked him to talk to us about the recent medical marijuana revolution in America.
America's an interesting situation because the states are starting to change the laws, while the federal government still holds this crazy position that cannabis is a drug no matter what you're doing with it. Whether you're feeding people or building houses or healing people, it's all a undesirable dependence-producing substance and no medical value and no legitimate value. So it's very interesting in that situation that some of these states are going, actually, you know, DEA, federal government, you don't know what you're talking about, and we're going to change our law because we can see the opportunities that this plant is bringing our neighbors in Canada and many other countries. And what's happening now is a stimulation in these states that are growing cannabis, whether it is for medical or industrial.
For thousands of years, cannabis was known to be a highly effective medicine. But how and why does it work on the human body? Cannabis has two main active ingredients. CBD doesn't make you high and works with the endocannabinoid system in the human body, while THC produces the feelings of euphoria, and works only in the brain. Dr. Marlon Gurman has spent much of his medical career studying the human endocannabinoid system and why CBD is so effective in healing humans.
The endocannabinoid system exists in all mammals and other organisms like sea squirts, which means it's been around for millions of years. And it's an integral part of our physiology and of our evolution. And the endocannabinoid system is not just there for the fun of it. It's an essential part to maintain homeostasis, to maintain balance in the body.
Professor Donald Abrahams, Chief of the Hematology Oncology Division at San Francisco General Hospital, explains his experiences with medical cannabis over the last 30 years.
My personal experience is that my patients benefit greatly from using cannabis. In fact, even not using the prescribed anti-nausea medicines that I recommend. So it definitely works. An interesting one is post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. As yet, there has been no clinical trial demonstrating that cannabis is useful. And I pretty much say I need a study to show me that cannabis is useful in PTSD, like I need a study to show me that penicillin is an antibiotic. I think that the number one indication that people access cannabis in the state of New Mexico is PTSD. Every day in my oncology practice treating cancer patients, I see patients suffering from nausea, loss of appetite, pain, insomnia, depression. I can tell those patients, try one medicine instead of prescribing 6 or 7 different medicines, all of which may interact with the chemotherapy I prescribe or with each other. And I ask all of my cancer patients, what brings you joy? And the number of people living with cancer who tell me that gardening brings them joy is not insignificant. I think if you feel that you're dying or part of you has died, that the ability to bring life out of the ground is a blessing. And for patients who can grow their own medicine, that's very empowering. Cannabis has been a medicine 3,000 years, for a lot longer than it hasn't been a medicine 75 years. And it's one of the safest, if you look at it compared to the other medications that we prescribe as physicians, it's quite safe. The risk of dependency is quite low, less than 10%, so addiction is not an issue. And it is not a gateway drug by virtue of physiologically making you want to do heroin or cocaine, but it's a gateway drug only by the fact that it's widely available and more people use that before they move on to something else, just as more people use nicotine, alcohol, or sugar before they move on to cannabis.
The medical and recreational cannabis market is only the tip of the iceberg. The greatest benefit to the planet will come from industrial hemp, which has the potential to become a $1 trillion industry without the toxic and earth-destroying byproducts of the petro, plastic, paper, and cotton industries. The industrial hemp crop is broken into 3 main outputs: fiber, seed, and hurd, all from the same harvest. The fiber comes from the outer layer of the hemp stalk, which is peeled away and spun into yarn. This process can be done either by hand for a coarse, rough finish or by machines to get a finer product. The fiber can then be used to produce fabrics for clothes, sheets, bags, and carpets, or turned into ropes and twines, or paper and cardboard, creating tens of thousands of new jobs.
We started in 1996 and we first looked at this industry. The Agricultural Research Council had started their trials on growing hemp in South Africa. So we were confident at that stage that within a few years we'd get it right. We have a great climate and a great opportunity to grow hemp in South Africa. And we thought, okay, well, let's build our model on imported products. And then once South Africa gets the law changed and our farmers are growing, we'll just be able to change our source to local. 22 years later, we're still importing from other countries. So this beautiful item over here is made from hemp chipboard. So the whole case is literally made from hemp. And it's what I would take into Parliament and into various government offices to say, this is the real picture of what this plant can do. So in my case, I have pretty much everything. It starts from the stalk. So this is what the stalk looks like. These are the fibers, the rough fibers that come off the stalk. This is where your textiles come from. This is 3 times stronger than cotton, grown without the pesticides that cotton needs, and gets about 300% more fiber per hectare than cotton does. That gets processed into these rough fibers, and this rough fiber can even be made into products by hand that communities can do, like this. This is carpeting from India, made on a small loom by communities that are pulling this fiber off by hand. It doesn't even need machinery. But that fiber then can be processed further down the line to make more hardy products, like canvas. The word canvas comes from the word cannabis. All canvas used to be made out of hemp, but right down to even hemp silk blends. You know, this is the range of hemp materials that you can get that can replace cotton in South Africa. Also, if you're not going for textile grade fiber, you can make insulation or mattresses out of the hemp as well. So you can see here, it's not finely processed, still some thick bits of stalk, still odd little bits of hemp hurd in there from the stalk, but this is able, you can do this on normal non-woven machines. But instead of using fiberglass that you can't touch and gets in your skin and doesn't biodegrade, you're now using fiberglass. You can make ropes and twines. You can make webbing from hemp. We have the seeds. You know, in this, if you look at these seeds, you might see, okay, here's a couple of tablespoons of omega fatty acid oil. Or here is the ability to make all of these products if I had to plant these again.
Hemp seeds come from the flowers of the female cannabis plant. They can be eaten raw, ground into a meal, sprouted, or blended into hemp milk for use as a dairy supplement. The seeds can also be pressed into an oil, which has a high fatty acid concentration, in particular omega-3, omega-6, and omega-9, and also rich in antioxidants, vitamins, and phytosterols. To find out more about the benefits of cannabis as a food source, we chat to Peter Daniel, co-founder of Superfoods. Peter has been consuming cannabis in all its dietary forms for over 10 years.
It was only in discovering it as a food, which was called hemp, that I was reintroduced to this plant and actually started getting a much deeper understanding and appreciation for its capacity to not only feed us but to heal us. And that journey has continued until I've reintegrated cannabis, which is actually what the plant is. And it's been a profound experience. I've been a vegetarian for many years and was a raw vegan for many years, and as a protein source, this has literally formed the foundation of my cells. I've literally experienced the profound effects nutritionally of this plant. At the moment, what you'd find in health food stores is the seed. That's the easiest for us to sell in the grey area of the law, particularly in this country. But for me, the leaf matter is almost better. You get more mineral value than the closest green relative, which is spinach or kale. Way more minerals in the hemp leaf itself. So my preferred way of utilizing it is to use it as a primary green juice ingredient. So I'm a big proponent of juicing green vegetables. For many, many years I've seen profound changes in people who juice green vegetables, green leaves. And none of them are using the hemp leaf because obviously it's been illegal and taboo to grow it. But this plant has been shown in Canadian studies and now in the States to be profoundly nutritious. For me, it's a vegetable. It's our primary vegetable. When you consume it as a green vegetable, green juice, it's uncarbolized, so the cannabinoids are not psychoactive. So you're not going to get a high or a stoned experience from it, but those cannabinoids are still having a profound effect on your neurology. They're linking into those CB receptors, and they're playing the part of the master regulator within the body's endocannabinoid system, which is fantastic, very exciting research happening right now.
For a more culinary approach to utilizing cannabis, Jules Harris has a business producing hemp seed-based pestos and sauces and shows us how it's done.
Hemp seeds from America and some garlic, white pepper and some salt. And then we're going to go into, this is ground macadamia, local nuts. And then the hemp seed. We're going to blend. It's handmade and done. That's it.
Another use of the pressed oil is in the production of cosmetics, soaps and shampoo. Amelia Karg explains why she started her journey into cannabis cosmetics.
Because the oil is high in vitamin E, and it's a dry oil, so it absorbs very easily into the skin. I lived in the States for a couple of years and ran across Burt's Bees. Loved the product, came back to South Africa and wanted to give people something that was natural, that they weren't going to worry about chemicals that they're going to be putting into their body. And when you have a hemp seed oil base, where you have all of the omegas as well as the vitamin E and all of the benefits, so I started on that journey.
Cannabis seed oil is not only valuable for its nutritional uses, but has a wide range of industrial applications and can be used to create products including paints, varnishes and fuel. Ma Mickey feeds around 200 poor people a day in the Kailicha community of Cape Town and has incorporated hemp oil into her food and found that the healing properties are almost beyond belief.
When we finish to cook, we put the hemp, we put the superfoods in a pot and then we stir it.
That hemp oil, I found that the rashes just move away from my skin.
Yes, I would like to for everybody because it helped me a lot. It helped me to gain my weight.
It was very, very surprising because I didn't know in my life at my age that there's a house can be built without cement.
Besides utilizing cannabis oil as a nutritional supplement, Ma Mickey is also an advocate for hemp as a building material and has a community-built hemp house on her property. Herd is the inside part of the stalk that has a range of applications as a building material, from hempcrete for walls and floors, chipboards for interior and exterior use, and insulation for sound and temperature. We chat to Wolf from Wolf & Wolf Architects about the building potential of hempcrete and look at some of the hemp homes he has worked on.
I think what I enjoyed working on Mickey's house was, seeing how the people within the community really tapped into this as a means of building. Obviously in South Africa, if we're growing the hemp here, you'd be able to build a building with a very, very low carbon footprint. And I think that's what we're pointing towards. And we'll be able to build amazing homes relatively affordably, which will have a low carbon footprint. I definitely think there's an opportunity for hempcrete to replace an aspect of, conventional breeze block construction. And I think the advantage, again, would be using kind of a local material and also using materials that don't contain as much cement and toxic materials, essentially.
Italian and Dutch companies are looking at new ways of producing hempcrete and board that will speed up building times and create fireproof structures for low-income households. With the government's slow progress on cannabis business growth, a group of concerned individuals have started the Cannabis Development Council of South Africa. The aim of the council is to provide government with information and strategies for cannabis rural development programs. We chat to Jason Law, the founder of CDCSA, and what he feels is the potential for uplifting the rural communities that have been growing cannabis illegally for generations.
If we could, in the rural setting, set up like agro parks or car ops that are run by the traditional councils, we can teach the communities to separate the seeds from the buds, and the seeds then can be utilized for proteins to feed our communities. Then we can teach the communities how to extract the CBD from the flowers. There's a huge potential export product to all over the world. And one thing that we have in South Africa is a very good climate, and we've got an enormous amount of water, we've got land, and we've got labor. We could potentially support and export enormous amount of product from these rural communities to these northern countries that can't produce the same sort of crops that we do.
Professor David Nutt, founder member of the Independent Scientific Committee on Drugs, explains why the Dutch went for a recreational model and how it has helped give the Dutch the lowest number of heroin addicts in Europe.
We've got good examples of rational policies, particularly around cannabis. The best one's the Dutch. The Dutch have the coffee shops, people who can get cannabis to use recreationally. But why did the Dutch do that? They knew that if young people went to dealers to get their cannabis, they would always be offered heroin, and they wanted to stop the heroin market. So they gave young people easy access to cannabis in coffee shops, and they had this remarkable success. There are very few young Dutch heroin addicts. So that's a perfect example of how a policy has enormous health benefits.
With Congo, Lesotho, Malawi and Zimbabwe all entering the global cannabis industry with hundreds of millions of dollars in investment, Jules and Myrtle of Fields of Green for All held the Clinical Cannabis Convention to offer interested parties a deeper look into the incredible potential of the cannabis business. Tony Budden, one of the headline speakers for the convention, gives us his thoughts on what cannabis can do for South Africa.
So I was there to tell the full picture of jobs, houses, food, medicine, all from a plant that grows 3 to 4 months, would love our climate, would love our country, would enable our people to have jobs, sustainable livelihoods, take us from junk status to green status.